Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of racial violence, mass displacement, and the destruction of a community. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. Dr. A.C. Jackson opened his front door with both hands raised. He was one of the most respected surgeons in Oklahoma. White patients drove across the state to see him. On the morning of June 1st, 1921, he stepped onto his porch, palms open, surrendering. Someone shot him anyway. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, a 35-block neighborhood so prosperous it had its own hospital, its own bank, its own bus system. It was destroyed in under 24 hours. And then it was erased from the textbooks for 80 years. Greenwood Avenue, Tulsa, Oklahoma. 1920, two-story brick buildings line the street, the Dreamland Theater, the G.U.R. Lee Hotel, the Williams Building. 15 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, a dozen churches, a hospital. This was the Greenwood District. People called it Black Wall Street. To understand what happened to Greenwood, you have to understand what it was. In 1920, the Greenwood District was home to roughly 10,000 black residents. It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an economy. Money circulated internally. Black-owned businesses served black customers. O.W. Gurley owned a hotel and multiple properties. Dr. A.C. Jackson ran a surgical practice so respected that the Mayo Clinic had taken notice. This prosperity didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed in Oklahoma in the 1920s, inside a country built on the assumption that black wealth shouldn't exist at this scale. On May 30th, 1921, a 19-year-old shoeshiner named Dick R.O.H. Lund stepped into an elevator in the Drexel Building in downtown Tulsa. The elevator operator was a 21-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. What happened between them is still unclear. Most historians believe R.O.H. Lund stumbled and grabbed Page's arm. She screamed. He ran. The next day, the Tulsa Tribune published an incendiary article. The details of that article are partly lost. The relevant page was later removed from the Tribune's archives. But by that evening, several hundred white men had gathered at the Tulsa County Courthouse, where R.O.H. Lund was being held. Tulsa in 1921 was a boomtown. Oil money was everywhere. The population had tripled in a decade. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made fast and grudges ran deep. Micro cliffhanger 1. Word reached Greenwood that a lynch mob was forming at the courthouse, and the men of Greenwood, many of them veterans of the First World War, decided they weren't going to let it happen. Round 10 p.m. on May 31st, roughly 50 to 60 armed black men arrived at the courthouse. They offered to help the sheriff protect R.O.H. Lund. The sheriff turned them away. As the group began to leave, a white man approached one of the black veterans, a tall man carrying a rifle, and tried to disarm him. A single shot rang out. By midnight, 12 people were dead. 10 white, 2 black. The violence spread from the courthouse into the streets. But what happened at the courthouse was a skirmish. What came next was something else entirely. It's worth pausing here. 50 armed men showed up not to start a fight, but to prevent a lynching. They were turned away, and then they were blamed for what followed. Micro cliffhanger 2. But the mobs on the ground weren't the worst of it. At dawn on June 1st, a white mob numbering in the thousands moved into the Greenwood District. They carried guns and kerosene torches. They moved systematically, block by block. And then the planes came. Witnesses reported private biplanes circling low over Greenwood, dropping burning turpentine balls onto rooftops. This was aerial bombardment, on American citizens, on American soil. Mount Zion Baptist Church, completed just weeks earlier, burned to its foundation. The mob didn't act alone. City officials deputized members of the white mob, giving them legal authority. Police officers joined in or stood aside. The destruction wasn't a riot that spiraled out of control. It was organized. It was sanctioned. By noon, the Oklahoma National Guard imposed martial law. But they didn't protect the residents of Greenwood. They rounded them up. More than 6,000 black men, women, and children were marched at gunpoint to Convention Hall and the county fairgrounds. They were interned there, held in detention, while their homes burned behind them. When it was over, 35 blocks of Greenwood lay in ashes. The official death toll was 36. The Oklahoma Commission, which finally investigated in 2001, estimated the actual number was closer to 300. 10,000 black residents were left homeless, $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property were destroyed, roughly $40 million in today's dollars. The insurance companies denied every single claim. The policies had riot exclusion clauses. The city offered nothing, no compensation, no rebuilding funds, no acknowledgement. And then, something almost worse than the fire. The massacre was erased. It was left out of Oklahoma textbooks. It was omitted from city records. The Tulsa Tribune removed the relevant pages from its archives. For 80 years, an entire generation of Oklahomans grew up without knowing it happened. The Oklahoma Commission didn't publish its findings until 2001. Tulsa public schools didn't add the massacre to their curriculum until 2002. The residents of Greenwood rebuilt their neighborhood by the end of 1922. Without a single dollar of outside help, without compensation, without even an acknowledgement that it had happened. There are two kinds of destruction in this story. The first took less than 24 hours, the fires, the guns, the planes. The second took 80 years, the slow, deliberate act of forgetting, of removing pages from archives and leaving chapters out of textbooks, of letting a city pretend that 35 blocks of prosperity simply never existed. The people of Greenwood rebuilt. They did it alone. That's resilience on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. But resilience shouldn't be the whole story, because the question this history asks isn't whether they could survive it. It's why they had to. Dick R.H. Lund, the young man whose elevator ride started it all. The charges against him were quietly dropped. Sarah Page never pressed charges. She never testified. Whatever happened in that elevator, it wasn't worth a single life. It certainly wasn't worth 300. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend, but maybe don't tell them it's all real until after they've finished. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.